of the CHIPS Act, the European CHIPS Act, which negotiations concluded yesterday afternoon in the European Parliament. And I see the CHIPS Act, for example, as a legislation that is a little bit more strategic compared to previous legislations like the DSA, the DMA. Many of you have heard of those that have a pure regulatory focus.
Lila, you spent a good part of your career in the semiconductor industry. You've been in software. You've been in venture capital. Why AI?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I was 30 years. I'm 30 years into my career right now, and I feel extraordinarily fortunate to have spent earlier parts of my career bringing new technologies into new markets and to new segments. And I, as you said, I've had a pretty circuitous career. And I decided after some period of time, I kind of need a break. And someone said, you really need to talk to this company. And I said, oh, yeah, not quite yet. And they're like, no, it's based in London. I'm like, oh, I'm in California. I know it was wintertime. I'm like, yeah, definitely not. But I was, and they're like, oh, they're working in AI. And I said, well, I don't know. I know a lot about technology and new markets. But I did it as a favor to a mentor, and it turned out to be a life-changing conversation. But I kept trying to get out of the job. And I thought, if I want to do AI, I can stay in Silicon Valley. Why would I want to work on AI if I've not done this before? And so I was asking a lot of questions during the interview process. In fact, I spent 50 hours interviewing the company to make sure this was the field I wanted to go into in the last part of my career. This was the role as chief operating officer, and this was the company. And what really happened was I realized that AI was the intersection of technology and social impact, and this was an organization with high integrity. And the more I interviewed the company to see if this is really what I wanted to do, I'd go home and I'd tuck my twin daughters into bed saying, what kind of world are they going to live in? And can I bring my experience of technology and social impact to make DeepMind's approach better, faster, because the organization that's going to develop more generalized AI first should be the one who I feel like from an integrity perspective can do it. And I often describe it as a moral calling. And that is how I ended up at DeepMind and being the person on the executive staff who brought in a different perspective.
Now that we know a little bit about the mindsets with which you approach this subject, I want to hammer away at both of you and cover a lot of ground over the course of this panel. There is an extraordinary amount of attention around AI, and specifically generative AI technology, that underlying ChatGPT, Bard, and others like Stable Diffusion. Help us level set. It's important. Is the exuberance justified, and what about the fears? Lila.
I think it's a very exciting time in AI. Generative AI is something I think has really shifted the conversation because it's, just as we saw by the show of hands here, it's made everyone's interactions with AI slightly differently. We've been fortunate to have been working on this for a while, so are aware of the capabilities and potential. The area that I'm particularly excited about actually has less to do with generative AI and really about where AI can help advance science and benefit humanity in some of the most challenging problems of our time, such as the environment and climate crisis. We're already using AI systems to do things like make existing infrastructure optimize existing infrastructure. So we've worked with our counterparts at Google to optimize data centers and saving up to 30–40% of energy savings. We've been able to use AI as a tool to develop better prediction models. The Met Office in the UK actually, out of 50, we had 50 Met meteorologists actually wanting to use the DeepMind AI system for the prediction, and this could be critical in times of extreme climate shifts. And then finally, we're using advanced AI systems to uncover new solutions to problems that we don't fully understand or that we think may never be achievable. We've worked to and use AI to help control the plasma of nuclear fusion reactors, which is an important step in the safety of making this a viable solution. So I think there's a lot of things that we're seeing, and generative AI in my mind is really just the first rung on a very long ladder. I think it's exciting to think about the potential, and again, the reason I joined DeepMind was thinking about what future I want to hand my children and the generations that follow, and I believe AI can help us create a better society.
Eva, you have a constructive view on the role of business and technology in the economy and in society. So how do you balance the two, particularly as someone who is drafting regulation, the exuberance on the one side, and as I said, the fear on the other?
Well, it's a fine balance, and it's a very difficult balance. First and foremost, because the European law on AI was presented by the Commission more than a year ago. Mm-hmm. So the work just in the European Parliament has been ongoing before the whole hype around ChatGPT. And it has not taken into consideration those foundational models. So right now, we've already had a difficult discussion into making sure how we legislate, not just from a civil liberties perspective, not just from the perspective of privacy and protection of our citizens, but also the perception of helping companies, particularly in Europe, innovate, grow, flourish, and develop some of those tools that would help society become better. Over the past couple of months, the conversation has shifted, meaning we would need to address those foundational models as well. So there's a number of things of how to make that balance right. And I don't think it's just up to the new legislation. First and foremost, we need to look already at existing laws, such as GDPR and others, and see where regulatory bodies are enforcing them well, whether they are implementing the law at all, and where they are acting at the time, and create a coordination among them. So the same set of rules applies all across countries and jurisdictions which abide by those rules. The second thing is to make sure that this, horizontal law that we are working in, it will affect all fields in society is done wisely. There has been a lot of discussion around what consists of high-risk AI to make sure we very well discuss and label what is low-risk AI, what should be banned, what is high-risk AI, and how those are decided, because depending on which category a company falls into, you're going to abide by more rules or less rules. And finally, I think it's complementing this too, and finally it's about political leaders trying to understand this disruption that's happening in society and how it will change society.
So in that context, I have to ask you both about the letter. And the letter I'm talking about is the one that was signed about 3 weeks ago by more than 1,100 technologists and industry leaders in AI, calling for a 6-month pause on development to allow for more safety controls. And of course, it caused a stir. I suspect many of you are familiar with it. It described, and I'm going to quote directly from the letter, an out-of-control race to develop and deploy ever more powerful digital minds that no one, not even their creators, can understand, predict, or reliably control. Is that an accurate description of what's going on?
I think Lila can tell better if that's an accurate description, but from where I'm sitting, the way I see things is that this letter and the various calls that we have heard and read over the past couple of weeks in particular have to trigger the conversation, the societal conversation. And in that societal conversation, policymakers, political leaders, the business that works, many of the people that represent different stakeholders and parts of society who've signed that letter have to be part of that conversation, because ultimately, and I have said that in the past, if you want society to embrace technology and to trust technology, you need to have that social contract with society. And if it's necessary to put more guardrails, to put certain mechanisms and principles in place, and this is what we want to do in the AI Act, you need some sort of clear principles and mechanisms, not just to regulate the next big thing that is coming, but that will be foundational for the technology under which whatever you want to create that has to do something with AI, you need to abide by those basic principles and mechanisms. So if we do that, it would be very helpful for whoever wants to work on AI to know that these are the safety things you need to take care of. And I think if more rules are necessary, which the letter calls, they need to be discussed. It will not help to ban it in one country or another country, because it would still be developing and operational in a third country or a fourth country or a nation or a continent. So it's a very complex conversation, and my worry is that it's not necessarily taking place in the way I just described.
So, Lila, is your industry out of control?
Well, I don't quite see it that way. I do think the essence of the letter, which calls for responsibility and safety, is a good one, and one that we agree with at DeepMind. I also, with what you've just said about the importance of having, how do we bring parties together across sectors, across geographic boundaries. Within DeepMind, as I said, I've spent the past 5 years really, you can have a set of AI principles to put them into practice and do it in a way where it's part of the DNA of an organization. It's hard work. It takes effort, and it takes leadership time and commitment and dedication and accountability to do that. And you can't have conversations externally without having this inside your own organization. And so, even since DeepMind's founding, we've had a set of AI principles since 2010, which really became the cornerstone of, I think, what a lot of other companies are doing. So I feel that the responsibility needs to start with conversations in the organization. It needs to be operationalized. It needs to be touching all aspects of the development. Then you can think about the deployment, like responsible development, deployment. And I think what's happening is a lot of times we think about the deployment, and then responsibility becomes like a bolt-on rather than truly integrated. And then we need to be able to have the communication and the conversations. What I'm excited about right now that's happening in our industry is that, again, show of hands, that we can have these conversations. More people are interested in coming to have the seat around the table. Different stakeholders from private sector, from companies outside the AI sector, from government, from civil society. And I think it's part of the reason that we're here today is because we want to raise the visibility of these conversations and the need for us all to be working together.
What about this idea of a pause on development? The arguments in favor are safety, of course, job security for people whose livelihoods may be threatened, and, at the end of the day, even the viability of the human race. And the arguments against are noncompliance, right? Nobody's going to honor an agreement like that. Enforcement is basically impossible. And by way of example, the geographical point that you raised, China and Russia just don't care. They're going to speed ahead while the West stands still, and so we can't afford to stop. Where do you stand?
Well, maybe just a question. It might sound a little bit too political, but a lot of the people calling for a stop of the development are continuing to go ahead with that development. So if they
might you be thinking about Elon Musk?
For example, but not only, probably. So I just think that...
you think it's hypocritical?
I just think that one way to put a ban is from a regulatory perspective to say we will put a ban. But again, you won't put a ban everywhere, right? So it would still continue to develop. And another thing is for companies to sit together, because we're speaking about a handful of companies at the moment, at least the ones that are creating the hype, to decide to maybe slow down and take a step back. From the point of view where I see things and what politicians can do is have the conversation with society. Do we really need this at the speed it is developing now? This is one question that why would we want this developing in this particular way? What are the perils? What are the possibilities? The speed is unprecedented. And it's very difficult for society to be able to grasp the speed with which things are moving. We earlier in the breakout session talked a little bit about jobs. I've been hearing that jobs will be lost for about 10 years now. I'm not necessarily seeing it, and I think the conversation now has shifted to other societal concerns that are much broader and are much bigger, and we need to be able to assess those. It's even a philosophical discussion, and it's a very hard discussion, and this is why I think from a political perspective, it's not easy to have it, and it might not happen until a more major, one could call it a catastrophic event, doesn't happen to trigger that conversation. But ideally, it should happen earlier.
Lila, has the Pandora's box that Sam Altman opened by releasing ChatGPT to the public changed life inside DeepMind? Is there now an inexorable tug toward allocating resources for large language models and generative AI in a way that wasn't before?
DeepMind's been in existence since 2010. It's a long time. We've been working on generative AI models for several years. In fact, even a few years ago when we released our first technical paper, we held off on releasing the technical paper until we had done an ethics assessment and realizing that there wasn't even a taxonomy about how to talk about risk. So we held back a technical paper until we did this together. So I would say generative AI is part of DeepMind's portfolio, but it's not the only thing. Our mission is really to advance science to benefit humanity. And we've been working, it's more of a long-term mission. It's why things like AlphaFold on protein folding or the work around climate are areas where we're investing. So we have a slightly different approach to a lot of this. Has it shifted how we operate? I would say the conversation, we've been very internally focused. It's shifted the conversation now. Everybody wants to understand a little bit more about AI, understand potential implications, near-term, long-term, bias, inclusion, implications on labor market, et cetera. So I think what's exciting is for us to be able to say, okay, well, we come as knowledge experts on AI, but there's so much we don't even know. Even when we were developing our AlphaFold system, we brought in biologists because we said, okay, we know what AI can do to solve this 50-year-old problem in biology about understanding life and disease and all these other things, but what implications does this have on the biology community? So what's happened now is we shifted of being internally focused to say, okay, we can bring this, we can share our knowledge, but regulators, please, how can we help you understand this? How is it best to regulate? The creative community. Let's explain a little bit more about what generative AI is and isn't. Tell us a little bit more about how you might be able to use this. What are you worried about? So we can build that into how we do our research.
People know, though, that at the very least they're aware that DeepMind is part of Google, and they wonder, and I wonder, whether because of the phenomenon that generative AI has become in only a matter of weeks, really, whether Sundar, the CEO, or Ruth, the CFO, is saying, you folks at DeepMind, I need you to be working on this now.
DeepMind has operated as an autonomous organization. We joined forces with Google in 2014. And the founders made the decision at that time that in order to accelerate progress towards the mission of advancing science to benefit humanity, it really required additional resources.